How you doing, folks? You're watching Onward with Onrie Live, and I'm your host, Onrie Compen. Today's guest has had a very significant impact on me as a creator. As a matter of fact, I gotta say that I probably wouldn't be where I am or who I am without his guidance. I remember in 2006, I was at the E3 Game Expo, and I was in line to meet two very famous creators. And one of them is the guest who is on the show today. And what happened was I was waiting in line to meet him, and I come up to him, and I said, "Hey, can you give me some advice?" And he says to me, "Yes, write something, learn from that, then write something else, learn from that, write something else, and learn from that." And I was like, my mind was blown. And I asked him, can I have your email? Like, is there any way we could just trade contacts? And he said, yes. So he gave me his email address. A couple weeks later, I asked him, could you send me a script that you've written for a series that I love that he wrote? And he totally hooked me up. After that, we saw each other a couple more times. And as I continued to rise up in my place in the industry, he's always been a friend. And it is my pleasure and sincere honor to have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Jenkins into the house. The legendary Paul Jenkins. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. Oh, Jenkins. We got a loop there.
Look at all the noise, man. We went nuts.
Yeah, we did. We went nuts.
I love the build up. I love the build up and the complete fail. That was perfect. That was yes.
So, Paul, you don't need an introduction. Everybody knows who you are. You're the guy who created this century. You wrote Wolverine's origin. You created Wolverine's origin. You have done countless things to basically build up Marvel from the point when it was on the edge of bankrupt, or when it wasn't bankruptcy. You basically helped play a huge part in rebuilding the company to where it is now. And on top of that, since then, you've gone on to do so many other projects, a lot of them your own, and have found so much success. You know, what do we attribute this to? How do you just constantly strike gold like this?
Well, I think, it's very difficult to self-assess, right? Like you have to step outside of yourself and look back at what you've done, or you certainly can't look at yourself in the moment, right? I normally don't read the stuff that I create or look at it for maybe a year and a half to 2 years after it comes out. And I know that sounds like weird, but I think I'm a little bit quirky anyway, because there's certain things that I do that maybe I think other people don't do. But we have a few goals as creators, right? And I think you probably see this, because I know that as a creator yourself, you've spent a lot of time like pushing your work, going to conventions, trying to build, you've networked, you've done, there's the work, there's the promotion, there's all these different things that you have to do to make a piece of work happen, right? And so in all of this, the question that we ask ourselves is, what's our equation for why do we create? Like, why do we create? Why do you create, right? And I've always thought that there's almost like an equation for it, right? It's either going to be because you like the attention, because you like the money, because you like the work, right? It's some combination thereof. Now, listen, somebody could do it completely 100% because they like the attention, right? And that's their reason for doing it. I got no issue with that. I have no issue whatsoever. They can do it 100% because they like the money. I have no issue with that whatsoever. And I feel that everyone has their little piece of this equation. And maybe I could throw this back to you as I'm telling you mine, right? Like, what's your equation, right? What's anyone's equation?
I would say it's all three. I mean, but it's interesting because you were mentioning the work, right? And the work, I think, is the most important aspect of it. And I find myself in this position right now where I'm trying to think of what's my next project going to be. And I had this idea for a superhero story, but every time I keep trying to tackle it, it just feels so juvenile to me. And it's something I got to work past my own barriers for, of course. And it's just one of those things that when we talk about the work, why we do it, for me, it's a combination of all these things. Yes, I like the attention. Yes, I want to make money doing what I love, but it's also got to be the work too. And especially like, when you look at the kind of stuff, because your stuff is going to be seen by other people, you're going to have an impact. You know, what you did with the Century, for example, you know, that had a tremendous impact on me as a creator, because here's this guy who's basically Superman, and he's got all these psychological issues that, you know, and the way you weaved him into the Marvel universe as if he'd always been there. It's also like, you know, it brings that takes a lot of ingenuity to just insert something like that into a world, and you are going to impact people, and that impact too comes, you know, directly from that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at it like this, Henri, right? Like my equation is that I used to be probably 5% money, 95% creativity, like 0 attention. And that was almost a problem, right? There is a thing that can be real about maybe being like too humble or too far away from one aspect of what we do. You know, I want the attention because I want people to read what I do. I want people to see what I do. I want them to see what I make. And so there's an element of that attention that I think is important and maybe healthy. And it was almost unhealthy that I would be so afraid of getting that attention. I love people, man. I'm like the friendless person at shows, but
absolutely.
I didn't care about walking a red carpet. I've done one red carpet event. I've had the opportunity to do 100, and I've done one, and it was great. And I went. It was the first Ninja Turtle movie. We did it. I was working with the Ninja Turtles when I first started out. I was really young. We went to the British premiere, and so, and I said, yeah, great, okay. So I went over, and my family were all excited. My brother came up and brought weed for Alan Moore, which was great. Right?
That's fucking awesome.
And we were in the Browns Hotel, and basically they kind of looked at my brother because you know, my background's a little different. We're a bunch of pikeys, and so my brother showed up with a bunch of big fucking bag of weed, and Alan's sitting with us. Alan's wearing a brilliant brown suit, and they looked at my brother and like, you're not coming in here. We're in the swankiest hotel right off of Hyde Park. And we went, no, he's with us. And they were like, yeah, that figures. So in comes my brother hanging out. So later that night, all of my mates at the Ninja Turtles were, you know, they had, let's say, very statuesque wives and girlfriends, quite a lot of them, you know, they were hooked up. And I took my grandmother. So,
that's great. That's excellent.
So I went to the thing, took my grandmother, and we picked her up. We watched a movie with her. Everybody adored her. And then at the end, the BBC said to us, do you want to come to the after party? And I asked my nan, do you want to go to the after party? She goes, yeah, okay. So we took her to the after party, and all of the celebrities found out that I brought my grandmother, and they were just like, this is amazing. Yeah, I can't believe, young man, you brought your grandma. And so, like, I'll never forget, like, Elton John kind of dripping off my grandmother, and like Queen were there, and Freddie, what's his name? Brian May comes up to me at one point and goes, young man, I heard you brought your grandmother. And I said, yeah, she's right here. And he said, well, you know, next time I'm going to bring my mother to one of these. I hate these bloody things. That's great.
But you know, that's something I got to say too. From when I remember the first time I saw you, I didn't meet you. It was at a Chicago convention. I think it was like in 2001 or 2. And you were you were working on Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man at that time.
Probably Peter Parker. Yeah.
It was the Marvel Knights version, or no, not the Marvel Knights, but it was the one of the, and it was a big deal because you had typeface in there and all kinds of different. And actually, you were one of the first writers to bring in the concept of a Black Spider-Man, which I
was the first, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that issue, and I still have it, as a matter of fact. It's in one of my long boxes. But anyway, here's what I remember. The first time I saw Paul Jenkins, you were jumping up on some pole or something, and you were wearing a hockey jersey, and you were like, yeah, something like that. And everybody was just like, wow, you know? And I think that there is that level of showmanship and that level of being on, you know, kind of like the whole Stan Lee thing of, you know, having that pizzazz that I just have always seen come from you, you know, even as you're on this show, I just feel that energy from you.
Yeah, but it's genuine, right? So there's a thing that I've tried to explain to people about those of us who are in the public eye, right? And whatever limited fashion. we're not trained in the comics industry. Certainly, there's a bunch of people not trained, and so I've often kind of like worried about some of my fellow creators who will kind of sit back and they won't talk to anybody, and then they'll just sign something for money and then they'll give it back and there's no personal interaction. But I will tell you that my stance kind of softened on that a little bit, because I began to realize, hang on a minute, why am I holding everyone to the same standard as me? I kind of like people. I'm happy to interact with them. I've got a lot to say. I really think that I love people, right? And so me getting out and being at a comic book convention is kind of like, I'm like a carnival barker. I like people. But that doesn't mean to say that everyone should be like that. Let me give you an example of I hope he doesn't mind this, but Adam Hughes is a super clever and sweet person, but he's kind of a quiet guy, right? So it's not to Adam's detriment that he's not really out there in your face, because actually when you talk to him, one thing that's really funny about Adam, you should follow his Twitter feed. He's one of the funniest people. His dry wit is to be admired, but he's not necessarily out there like I am, right? So I would always be a little bit mischievous. I'm trying to think who it was. Bosnian artist. God, used to work with Bendis a lot. I think it's Bosnian. Which artist am I thinking of?
Is it not Adi Granov?
No, not Adi Granov. Anyway, whoever it was didn't speak English and came on the Marvel panel, and someone basically said, "Do you speak Serbian?" Right? Does anyone speak Serbian? Like, sure, yeah, we all speak Serbian, right? And I went, yeah, I speak Serbian. So they sat him next to me, and we're in the big hall in San Diego Comic-Con, and he's sitting right next to, I can't remember his name now, sweet guy. And so everyone in the room, including all the Marvel people organizing it, think that I speak Serbian. Right? And so he sits next to me, and he starts speaking, right? And he says his thing, and he finishes. And I said to the audience, well, what he says was, he's very happy to be here in America, blah, 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 blah. And he is excited to meet some of your real American women, bouncy, bouncy. Right? And so the audience erupts with laughter. And he's just told a joke. So he's like, oh, they got my joke. So now he starts telling me more, and I start telling more. And I'm bullshitting. And the audience knows it. Right? So I think the thing is that we can have fun, and we can be, we got to love people and love having fun and care. And so one of the things that I care very much about is how we interact with fans. Yeah. And I think that you do this all the time, right? You see them, you have to kind of carnival bark, you have to be kind, you have to be patient at times. But I've gotten some tremendous lessons that I've learned from being at shows. And so that's just part of our career, right? It's an aspect of what we do.
I agree. And, the fact that there is a level of playfulness that comes into it, because what are we there to do? We're there to basically bring people away from their everyday lives. And that's what's fun about our job, right? Is that we don't have to be like, guys who walk into an office with a pull up our ass. We're supposed to have fun. We're supposed to make it an experience for people that they're not going to forget, that they're going to remember forever. I mean, dude, I will never forget meeting you for the first time and the advice you gave me, because that is pivotal, And
yeah, I was going to say, fail forwards, I think, was probably the message in that, right? It's like, go do
Absolutely.
it, break something, see what you broke, fix it. Don't do that twice, and then you'll be fine, man. You'll work it out.
Absolutely. And another thing too is, I tend to see a lot of creators out there. That is typically how it happens. Like I was looking at this one guy's artwork, and he had applied to me a long time ago, and his artwork back then was just not up to snuff. And I didn't want to like break him down. I wanted to give him some advice, kind of like what you did for me, like fail upwards, just keep at it, keep going. 10 years pass, and this guy is just absolutely killing it now. I mean, he landed on a great book. He's doing incredible work now. And, it's just one of those things where if you're serious about it and you keep going at it, then, you're gonna find your ground at some point.
Yeah, I agree. And also you and I and people like us, and we can pay it forward too, right? So I have lost count of, and I am very proud of one thing. You won't get me to be proud of, say, work that I've done. I get it, but I can be proud maybe of the body of my work, but I'm not that proud of it. I think it's what I have to do next is what's important. I think I've realized that I'm about as, well, I mentioned Alan Moore earlier on. I'm about as quirky as Alan. I'm actually sort of quirky in some of the ways that I do things and the way I see things. But I do take some pride in maybe the fact that on a monthly basis, maybe once every month or 2 months, I get a disembodied email or Facebook message from someone that says, "Hey, Paul, I met you on a bus in San Diego in 2002. You told me to keep going and you gave me some advice. And I just published my second graphic novel." Or because I will always mentor people and I always want to bring that forward. And I have my own company here in Georgia that we do, cross media development and production. And it's in the DNA of our company that we mentor people. And we nurture them. My company's called Meta, like Meta, Meta Studios. And META is an acronym that stands for Media, Education, Technology, and Advancement. And the education and advancement sides of it are important. We want to educate people to do what we do. And we want to make sure that we advance our community. And, up until a couple of days ago, we would always say advance our creative community. And we just made a statement about all the things that are going on right now. And we sort of amended that to some extent to say, no, we want to advance our entire community to some extent. Why would we not, right? So I think maybe if I take any pride, it might be in hopefully contributing as a force for some kind of decency in this world. And that might be something that's worth being proud of,
Well, Easton Shin is an example of that, my friend. It really is. And, honestly, I took everything you said very seriously, and I know that obviously a lot of other creators are doing the same thing. And, but I also think, let's go back to your body of work for a minute, because I want to mention another project that you were very heavily invested in that actually got me so excited that I wrote an entire college essay about it.
Uh-huh.
Soul Reaver 2.
Soul Reaver, yeah, cool.
Yeah, and the first game was good, but the second game was incredible because of the story and just how hooked I was to everything that was going on with Raziel and his journey forward to get Kane, and how you just totally flipped the switch. You flipped the script on everything. It wasn't just this typical revenge story. Now it was layered into something so much greater. In fact, that resonates with me so much that I wish I could go back and replay it, but like all my shit's not like working anymore. I have the games, but I can't even. So I've been watching it on I was watching it on YouTube, because you can actually just go back and rewatch all the story stuff. So I've never got a chance to actually sit down and ask you about that process, because it's got to be a lot different than comics. Like, did you have a lot of control working on that script as opposed to, like what's the difference in the mediums? Because you're working cross-platform on a lot of stuff right now.
So yeah, I was very lucky. I've always been very lucky in the sense that I've been allowed to create, been trusted to create, right? And what happened was that Amy Hennig and Amy went on to become the creative director over at Naughty Dog. She did the Uncharted series, right? Mm-hmm. And you see her DNA and the DNA of Raziel, right, in a number of games that she and I have been associated with over time, right? To some extent, what we did in Soul Reaver informed what I did on The Darkness. And The Darkness is probably one of the most emulated and copied games of its time because of the things that we did to move story forward. Amy's work on Uncharted kind of goes without saying. I mean, that series is incredible, and the story telling about a lot of it came from what we did with the Legacy of Kain series and really with Soul Reaver, right? So I remember being introduced to Amy, and she was the creative director, I believe, over there. She was certainly the story director, and she brought me in and she said, "We've broken it. Like, we need to fix this thing." And at the time, it was a very confusing sort of development, because this is Crystal Dynamics out in San Jose. And you had 2 floors, and one floor below was a floor who were dedicated to making Blood Omen, I think. Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen.
Yeah, because there was Soul Reaver 2 and Blood Omen 2 were developed at the same
They
time.
were right at the same time.
Yeah.
And we were doing Soul Reaver 2, and for whatever reason, the floors were at war with each other. And the internal politics there, and it was always to, it wasn't, Amy would just tear her hair out trying to make this thing happen. You couldn't imagine why these floors would be fighting with each other, but it was almost like a fight about continuity. And so Amy said, look, we got these other problems. We got two floors yelling at each other and fighting with each other. And it's difficult. It's complicated, but we need to make the best story we can. Now, here's what we've got. Here's where we've broken the logic. Here's all the stuff that we messed up. Here's the stuff that we think is amazing. Here's what we think we want to do. And she and I sat in a room for 3 days to try to determine how the story would go. And we finished after 3 days, and I've never had a headache like it in my life. I think she said the same thing to me, like, I have the biggest headache right now. But it's like we emerged and we were like cavemen. Like, I've invented fire.
You really did, though, because that was the most that was I don't think I've had an experience as a gamer like that since, because I was just so sucked in. I had to know what happened next. And the cliffhanger at the end, it was just such a cliffhanger. And everything just flowed. A lot of times when I'm playing video games, I find myself kind of losing interest rather quickly. Probably as I've gotten older, I've become a little bit more jaded too. And, you got kids and you got work and you got all these other things going on. But nonetheless, it was just one of those experiences that I have rarely seen replicated, a perfect balance between games and story. And, most of the time I find now that, the storytelling and the gameplay, they kind of step on each other's feet. And you get an experience that either has too much story and not enough gameplay, or, too much gameplay and not enough story. And finding that balance is it's really tricky.
Yeah, I remember when we did the first Darkness. So the Darkness is a really interesting game. It's one of the most emulated games in the business, and it's certainly one of the most admired for the way that we sort of did some things with storytelling that had never been done, right? But what was interesting about it was that the gameplay, I think, got rated on Metacritic with 147 measurable test reviews. The gameplay got rated at 10 out of 100. And the multiplayer got rated at 4 out of 100, right? Now, they said that they expected to sell 350,000 copies of that game, and they sold 1.6 million copies of it.
Holy crap.
The storytelling, characterization, and cinematic experience, which is kind of my job, were rated at 98, 95%. Everybody loved the story and the characters. So it showed the industry that story and characterization can make money. It was almost like one of the first groundbreaking games that did that. And it was coming right by BioShock. And if you notice, there are so many elements of BioShock that have elements of the Darkness in. And that's because my producer, Anthony DeLuca, was the producer on both games. And when BioShock came out, I said, "You cheeky bastard." And he said, and so, I think pushing the boundaries was what we did with Soul Reaver. It wasn't perfect, but that was a story about Gnosticism, man. You're talking about a video game in the 90s that was talking about the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. That's pretty cool because we were allowed to, and let me be clear about this. My contribution to it was nothing compared to Amy Hennig's. She's the person that did that. She's the real creative reason why Soul Reaver was what it was. That was Amy Hennig. And I think people should recognize that. And I believe they know that anyway. But yeah, Amy was the reason why that game was so good.
So you work in video games. Do you actually play video games yourself? And if so, what are you playing right now?
Yeah, I play video games. I play them all the time.
You're awesome, dude. That's awesome.
It's one of the few things that I do because I'm not a big, I work in film, television. I don't watch a lot of films, and I never watch TV. I never read comic books.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that before. I find it hard to read, especially like I rarely go to comic shops now and buy up comics every week. It has to be something very specific that, it's either got to be research or I'm looking to study a style because I'm working on layouts and I want to, see what a certain artist has done with something. And, but it's a very different experience for me.
Yeah, well, I don't read them, but that's been my superpower. Like I have an advantage, right? I don't read them, which means I'm not stuck in them.
Right. So you can actually depart and start working on stuff.
Well, I've spoken about it often, but for the sake of your show, we'll add it in one more time. So when Marvel asked me, do you want to come work at Marvel? This is Marvel Knights for Inhumans. They said, do you want to do the Inhumans? And I said, yeah. Who had I never heard of? And because I don't know anything about comics. And they sent me a couple of 5-page stories by Jack Kirby. And I said, don't send me anymore. That's it. I got it. And I wrote the Inhuman series based on those 2 5-page stories because I made up all the stuff I wanted to make myself. And so here was this fresh take on the Inhumans, and they'd never been able to sell those characters. And all of a sudden, here they were able to sell those characters. And it's like, okay, so, doesn't that prove something? Trust the creators and let us make great stuff.
I agree with that. And I had Christian Gossett on the show very early on, and that was one of those episodes that I like to bring up from time to time, because he was basically handed the keys to the Star Wars universe and was able to really build and expand upon a lot of stuff with the novelizations. And he just, when you give creators that access, they have a lot of fun. Now, working at Marvel, as you kind of rose up in the ranks and started working on more serious titles like, say, Spider-Man, from my understanding, and I've never worked at Marvel, did you have that same kind of control with these characters, or were there guidelines that you had to kind of follow in order to kind of make sure you weren't you didn't turn Spider-Man into a psycho killer or something like that, like certain things that had to kind of play with the mainframe of the sandbox that you were in?
With the exception of things like, please don't make him a serial killer, or please don't make him cross-dresser, or whatever it is that they would have been worried about, right? They basically went, we fucking broke it. Can you fix it for us? Like, go for it. Do whatever you can, because we broke it so badly. So go for it. In fact, they offered me Spider-Man after I did the Inhumans, and I turned them down for 2 years. Maybe 2.5 years. Ralph Macchio asked me if I would do it, and I said, I don't know what to write. I'll be honest with you, Ralph, and it doesn't really it's not really interesting to me, because I don't know how to do it, Ralph. And it was because it was so complicated and difficult. So that's why we did the Sentry after the Inhumans, because they said I could do anything I wanted, basically, because the Inhumans had won them an ISA. They hadn't won one in years, And so I went to, they said, you can do whatever you like. And I said, can I please do the Sentry? And I had pitched it to them. They turned it down for like 4 or 5 years. And they said, oh, for God's sake, that, all right, fine, we'll do the Sentry, kind of if you do something else. And the first thing I really did actually was the Hulk. They had a struggle with the Hulk, and they asked me to fix it. So,
oh man, I remember that too. Jesus, that book was, when they did the whole relaunch in the beginning of the 2000s, all those books were suffering. And they had some pretty big creators. They had John Byrne on art for Spider-Man. They had Sal Buscema on Hulk. But the storytelling was just so out there, and it really didn't get grounded until you came in there, and people like you started bringing it. You brought your British wit. You fucking British people and your wit.
We brought the British wit, but I think that actually we brought a storytelling sensibility. So take a look at the Hulk, right? The Hulk is not that difficult. And by the way, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did with the Hulk video game, which is probably more relevant.
Is it the Total Destruction one?
Yeah, Hulk Ultimate Destruction.
Yeah. My friend is a really big fan of that game.
Okay, good. So what we did with the Hulk was you get a character and you say, look, on a core level, what's the character about? Now, you don't take 4 seconds to know what the Hulk is about, Onrie. Come on, man. It's about, I need to contain my anger. I'm struggling to contain my anger. That's about as simple as it gets, right? So how was it not that? It was about, thematically, it was like, can we blow something up? And can we have a plane? Can the Hulk bring down a plane? Well, okay, great, brings down a plane. Now he's a mass murderer. So now where are you going to go with that character, right? What's the point? I can't follow that. So the very first thing that I pitched to them was this kind of storytelling. It wasn't a story. It was me as a storyteller. It was this kind of storytelling. That's what they bought into. And by the way, that's what they've gone away from, right? That's why it's gone away. Because when they're as broken as they were, when Marvel were that broken, where they're in chapter 11 bankruptcy and they're that close to going to chapter 7, they come to me and go, we need you, and you just do it, please. Whatever it is, that wizardy shit that you do, please do it. And so we go, okay, and we do it, and they let us do it. And there's things that we did in Spider-Man that they would never let us. Almost everything that I wrote, they would never let me do now, without some editorial interference, without saying no. But they trusted us. So here comes the Hulk, and the first thing that I wrote was about him having Lou Gehrig's disease, because the first point of all of this was, what's he all about? He's ticking time bomb, right? Well, how can we bring him a ticking time bomb? How can we get a thing that is counting down to 0 that's got, you know that it's going to go badly. Something's going to happen, right? And so giving him Lou Gehrig's disease was a way in which we said he's going to succumb to Lou Gehrig's disease, and when he does, the Hulk is going to get out, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. So it was a countdown to 0, wasn't it? And that becomes the Hulk story. That's really what it's about. Sure, we put in all kinds of interesting stuff and cool stuff, but I learned from John Romita Jr. one time. I learn all the time when I'm working, and I learned something from him, and it was, hey man, it's really cool that he's fighting the Abomination, but why don't we put it in front of a dam? Because you know that dam is going to burst and cover the town. And I'm like, yeah, man, great idea. Like, that's what the Hulk's all about. So at a certain point, I finally realized what I could do with Spider-Man. And I called up Ralph and said, I think I've got it. I think what I need to do is to write about how confused I am with all of the continuity. And I need to write a story in which Spider-Man casts away all of his continuity, where he gets rid of it until we strip him down to his simplest. And it was a story that I did in Web Spinners, Tales of Whatever. And it was about him, and just his heart was broken because he'd almost killed the chameleon, or it looked like the chameleon may have committed suicide in front of him. And he goes and falls into a dream in which he casts away all of the continuity till he gets back to the core of why he is who he is. And it's just him cracking wisecracks, punching the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus and the Vulture. That's it. That's all I want. And then in that dream, they disappear, and he's on a rooftop, and Gwen Stacy walks up to him and says, hey, Tiger. And you know that that's his love, right? And he says, I don't want to wake up. I want to be with you. And she says, you can't. And she walks away and leaves him, and he wakes up and he's like, I know who I am. And at that point, I knew who he was. And so when I started writing him, people would say to us, well, you can't write Spider-Man anymore. And I'm like, you speak for yourself. I haven't written him yet. And I think our first issue was about him going to see his Uncle Ben's grave and talking to his Uncle Ben. And all it was about was how he got his sense of humor and why it was important. That him as a core character needed a sense of humor, because he didn't beat the Dr. Octopus character with a punch. He beat them because he pissed him off. He would make a joke, and Dr. Octopus was so humorless, and the Green Goblin was so crazy that he would win every time because he annoyed him. And where did he get his sense of humor from? When he was a little orphan, he came to his Uncle Ben's house, and they played practical jokes on each other, and they would do like blackface. So
yes, I remember that. Yes.
And he learned who he is as a human being from his Uncle Ben. And that's what made him able to be Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, you had some really great standalone stories that really, and again, going back to the introduction of the first Black Spider-Man, I remember that issue very well. There was this, Black inner city kid, and he imagined who Spider-Man was. He adored Spider-Man. There was this whole issue where he imagined that he was out there patrolling the streets with Spider-Man and everything. And at the end of the issue, he finally gets Spider-Man, and Spider-Man takes off his mask, and it's Spider-Man as he would envision him to be a black man. And they shake. I forgot if they were shaking hands or hugging, but it was a very powerful splash. At the end there.
He says the little boy, he's in a rough situation. He's grown up in difficult situations. Mum's now OD'd, and now he has to go live with his Uncle Ray. And Spider-Man to him is an imaginary character that shows up. But one of the things that you may or may not have noticed from that book is that everything that Spider-Man says was something that all the positive men in his life would say, all the positive male role models. So his uncle and there's a little sign in his classroom from Epictetus that says something about all men are free and such and such. And he would personify this inside Spider-Man. So he'd get these little lessons that he learned as a little kid, and he would have Spider-Man say them. Don't worry, little man, all means, so you stay here and you learn how to count to 10 properly, and I'll come back and you could be my secret Spidey sidekick, right? And then at the very end of the issue, he has to move on. And so Spider-Man says to him, comes back and visits him one more as an imaginary character and says, okay, little man, time to move on. And he says, I love you, Spider-Man. And he's like, don't worry, buddy. Heroes don't hug, they shake hands. And he takes his glove and his mask off, and he's a black man. Because, of course, to that little boy, Spider-Man is a black man. And one of the things that we did was we modeled him on the basketball player Allen Iverson, because we wanted him to be a young black man from that particular era with, cornrows. And he's the guy that the kid would see in his life, right? And so I think, that's a tremendously powerful story, but it's a very honest story, because ultimately we will only ever see Spider-Man as us. And I know when I was a little kid, I lived in the country back into nowhere. I've talked about it recently. I we didn't have any electricity. We lived I lived in a caravan for a while. I was homeless for a little bit. And I had some exposure to comics, and I actually thought that Spider-Man was in London because I knew that it was a big city, and I knew that Spider-Man was floating around it. So I actually assumed that he would look like me and he would be in London, and he probably was British. I had no idea, because I wouldn't have known, right? I didn't care. I just figured he was like a grown-up that I wanted to be. So I figured if he was in a city, he probably was in London. We see ourselves in these characters, and I've kind of learned from those things, and that's what I try to bring to it.
I got Peter. I totally have Peter Parker syndrome. I'm always thinking about that. I'm always talking to myself as I'm working and doing stuff. Yeah. But now I want to take things in a different direction, because I think your career has you have gone in such an interesting direction. Most people are trying to get to where you started out at the top, but then you said at a certain point that you're going to focus more on your own independent projects. I remember you went exclusive with Boom, and you've done a ton of projects. You've used Kickstarter as a platform, and you've done all these projects, and now you got your own TV show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, we got a bunch of stuff that we're doing. By the way, I'm about to hit you up outside of this on Kickstarter. We are actually coming back to Kickstarter for the first time in a long time. I'm about to bring Fairy Quest back. So
you heard it first on Onward with Onrie Live. That is awesome. Congratulations. I will be a backer. I'm looking forward.
And I want to pick your brain a little bit. I know you've done it more recently than me. It's been a while since I did it, so I just kind of want to pick your brain about some of the things that you know.
Oh, Jesus, you're picking it. You're barking up the wrong tree here.
Why not?
Oh man, that is, honestly, I don't know that I'm trying to learn, and you're the guy I'd want to learn from.
Anyway, that's a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think what happened was that I'm useful to that business for as long as I'm useful. In other words, when they've broken it and they need someone to fix it, they need me, right? So they go, hey, how about Inhumans? And I go, I don't know, I don't even know, kind of, I suppose, sure. And I write it, and they win an Eisner, and they suddenly go, okay, hang on a minute. Can you do that again? Can you do like Spider-Man and fix that? And could you do the Hulk and fix that? And all of a sudden I'm fixing everything. And then at a certain point, it's a true story. A lot of people sort of talk about this particular thing, but it was basically Joe Quesada's first editorial conference. And they asked me to come in as a creative side because they knew I'd been an editor, and they also knew that I was a creator now doing pretty well for them. And so they said, would you come, right? And I was friendly with Joe, and I said, yeah. And I got there, and we could see that all the editors were terrified of everything. For one thing, in those days, it used to be that if you had an editorial conference, maybe 7 or 8 people would go home with a pink slip. Sorry, you're getting fired, you're getting fired, you're getting fired. Sorry, I had to let you go. So all the editors are terrified, and they're wondering what the hell is going to be the future. And then we went through the morning, and Bill Gemmis, who was the publisher, came up to me and said, all right, what's the problem? And I said, is it that obvious? He's like, you've been sitting there with a frown on your face all day. You're normally not like that. And I remember I'm such a punk, man. I don't really give a shit because that's the problem. I don't care about like self-promotion. I don't really care about, I care about the work, right? And so I said, well, here's what I don't understand, Bill. How come you're the house of ideas, but every time someone has a good one, you say no? And he said, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, it's just like you always say what you can't do, and I never understand it. It's like Grant Morrison does Arkham Asylum. DC go, brilliant. Grant Morrison goes, I've got a book just like it I want to do. And they go, well, I'm not so sure, Grant, if we want it. And it's like, why do you keep doing that, right? Like, why don't you trust us? So he said, well, give me an example. I said, why don't you do the origin of Wolverine? And he said, I don't know. Because Bill didn't give a shit, right? Bill wants to make money. And he said, I don't know why we don't do it. So we went over to Joe. We had a burger. And we walk over to Joe and he's eating a burger. And Bill goes, why don't we do the origin of Wolverine, Joe? And Joe's like, you can't do that. And Bill said, why? And Joe said, I really don't know, to be honest. You're right. So Joe was open to it, right? But it took him a minute. His first reaction was like, no. But maybe 20, 30 seconds. And Joe went, yep. Why are we doing this? Why are we saying no? So then it was funny. After lunch, we stood up and Bill basically said something like Bill got pilloried at times for being the Mad King because he was difficult to work with after a period of time. But in those days, Bill was just trying to make it work. And so Bill stood up in front of everybody and said to the editors, and I'll never forget this, he said, you're all scared of your shadows. Why don't you just say yes to stuff? You know what? You make good stuff and we will sell it. Marketing is no longer going to tell you how to do it, right? We're not going to tell you what to make. You're going to make it. And the editors are like, I don't believe this guy. That's not going to happen. But at least he said it. And so Joe Quesada stands up and said, why don't we do the origin of Wolverine? And they flipped out. No, you can't do that. You got to be kidding me. We're never going to be able to do that kind of thing. That's stupid. That's a bad idea. And Joe said, yeah, I get it. Anyway, why? And the fact is, there wasn't a single answer in there that was compelling. It was just, well, if you're telling the origin, then, but the whole point of it was, well, you can answer maybe 3 questions and then you can raise 1,000 more. Like, that's good storytelling. So the only things that we answered were, where was he born and when, right? What's his real name or the name he was born with? And why did he forget? Well, he was born in Alberta, Canada in the late 1800s. His name is James Howlett, and he forgot because he has a healing factor. And the healing factor, when he gets injured, it just repeat. And so what we said was, well, he had PTSD and his mind healed itself by making him forget. That's not that freaking complicated. In part, I think part of the reason was up until I said, well, why don't we just have him have PTSD? And we had those conversations, and then they went, oh, right, yeah. And I realized they don't know why he forgot, do they? They never had written that part. They just said he forgot, but they didn't know why, and they didn't know what the mechanism was. And I'm too freaking naive. I just thought that they all knew it was probably because his mind healed itself. And when they said, oh, we never thought of that, I'm like, oh, shit, I thought it was like self-evident in the character. So it was kind of like that naivety. Maybe it's indicative of the fact that I came externally and
just the character too. Like I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to. I remember the big reveal in issue 2. Issue 2 of Origin is just. I will never forget that book. Yeah. I was in my freshman year of college. It was like a crisp September day. I went over to my local comic shop, Graham Cracker Comics. I picked it up, and I'm sitting outside drinking coffee and reading Origin number 2. Yeah. And that book just pulled at my heartstrings when the guy who I thought was Logan, the guy that we thought was Logan, because his name was Logan, everything was obvious. It was all there. He kills a dog, and you're like, oh my God, that's the hero that we identify with. That's the hero that we love and everything. He's not very heroic. And then sure enough, there's that switcheroo at the end. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't read it, but at this point, everybody knows what.
I would imagine that people have read it at this point.
Yeah, of course they have. But when you found out that the sick kid, the kid that was like the you know, the little sissy guy, boy, he was Wolverine. I mean, and that was it was the trauma that triggered his mutant powers, and that was just like, oh my god, that's good story. That's not just good comics. That's good storytelling. And from that point on, that's what you want. That's what you want your comics to do, is to shock you like that, is to really get that reaction from the reader.
Right. And so in those days we could, right? A couple of things that are interesting about that. Number one is, you know, the first issue of that book is called The Hill. It's about a kid at the bottom of the hill looking up at the farm and seeing the lights blazing and living at the bottom in rough circumstances. So that was me when I was a kid. I was that kid. I looked up the hill. We had no electricity. You could see the farm with the lights blazing. We were allowed to play with the farmers' children, but we weren't allowed to their birthday parties because we were the gypsy kids at the bottom of the hill kind of thing. And so I've seen it and I've lived it, and a lot of my life ends up in my work. But the thing with that moment where we switched everything on you, there should be consequence in storytelling, and in most mainstream books there's no consequence. So what happened was, at a certain point with Marvel, I was a single issue guy. I love single issues, right? I was like, that's my life. I love it. You need to be able to pick up any book, read it, and go, I love that. And let's be clear. People come up to me, they talk about that story that you said about the little black kid, right? They talk about a story I wrote about baseball with him. They talk about the very first issue I wrote. They talk about the last issue I wrote. They will tell me, I remember that one where he played poker. I'm like, all single issues. And there's actually one thing that I've spoken about quite frequently. There's an issue about baseball that I did where he goes to a baseball game with his Uncle Ben every year. It was issue 33. It was like 2 issues before the one about the little black kid. And it's all about how he, on the anniversary of Uncle Ben's death, he goes to a baseball game because they would go every year. And it was what connected him to Uncle Ben. And I will have fans come up to me crying and weeping and saying, this affected me so much, and it made me think of my dad, my granddad, pick one, right? And so you sort of look at that and you go, well, you know, here's the interesting part about that story. I'm about to upset you now. There's only one panel in which he's actually dressed as Spider-Man. Just one. And that was because they made me put it in. It's literally a story about a little boy and his father figure going to a baseball game. That's all it's about. It's not, he doesn't punch anyone. There's no fights. It's literally a story about love and connection to people that you love. And it always kind of upsets Spider-Man fans because they really realize, hang on a minute, I love this because it's a story, not because it's got Spider-Man in it. So I always knew that, and I would stay true to my guns. And I think at a certain point in Marvel, and I remember exactly when it happened, there were 2 things that happened. I was writing Spider-Man. They said, we've got a crossover. It's maximum something, or it's a thing. And I went, I don't understand a word of what this crossover is about. I don't even get it. What am I writing here? What are you doing? And then I did Civil War Frontlines, and they never, ever edited a single word of it. And we went to go do Civil War. We went to go do World War Hulk Frontlines. And they said, okay, this is what you need to do. And you need to make sure that nobody dies and know this. And I'm like, This is a metaphor for Hurricane Katrina. The Hulk is coming from space. He's about to land in New York. You've got the obvious story that we can tell. And you're telling me that I can't tell that story? That no one can die, that this, that, and the other? Why are you telling me what to write? You've never told me what to write before. What's the thing that makes you tell me what to write suddenly? That makes, like, it's not my ego that's fighting you. It's more like, that doesn't make any sense. And guess what? 1 year later, they had sold to Disney. And you went, I see what you did there, right? I get it.
Yeah.
What that was all about.
So now you're working on your own stuff, and you know, Fairy Quest.
Yep.
Like you have complete free reign there because it's your thing, and you collaborate with Humberto Ramos, very celebrated Spider-Man artist. You guys did. He was working with you on Spider-Man at Marvel. You guys have since then gone on to create Fairy Quest. So. How does it feel having that much control? Because you have experience as a writer and editor, but now you're also handling the publishing and the promotion of something that's completely owned by you. Well,
it's fine. I remember before I was a writer, I was an editor and publisher at Mirage and Tundra Publishing. So I had been on that side of the table before anyway. So it's not that much of a stretch for me. So I enjoy it, but I love making my own stuff. And I've been working with Aftershock. They've been a good publisher. You know, we did some good books with them. But my heart is very much into my self-published created stuff. And so after a long break, we are coming back to Fairy Quest. We're going to be doing Fairy Quest 3. Umberto did the cover, but one of the problems was that Umberto couldn't do it anymore. And so, you know, I've come back with Mike Bowden, who's a great artist, and we're moving the series through differently. And we know that there's a self-evident truth about that book, right? I'll go to a show, let's say it's Dragon Con. I can go to Dragon Con, I can sell 100 copies of that book before I could sell 2 of Wolverine Origin. The fact is that everybody loves that book. They adore it because it's so honest and the art is so vibrant and the coloring is so vibrant. So I want to do that. I want to tell stories that I know resonate as opposed to try and even pitch any publisher, right? I want to make stories that I know are true all ages stories. Fairy Quest is, Fiction Squad is. I don't know if you ever saw Fiction Squad, but the premise of it was the actual world that was created before we did Fairy Quest. I had created a world called Fablewood, in which all the stories live in a giant forest, and they're all they are all kind of living together. And as they're inside this forest, one guy from the world of crime fiction hasn't had a job in 100 years because he was out of print. And so he moves across the genre border to go where all the nursery rhymes are because he realizes that every nursery rhyme is a crime scene. So Humpty Dumpty's a crime scene.
Yeah, it is.
And Jack and Jill's a crime scene and all that. So he gets there and he finds that the mayor of the town is the crooked man. The chief of police is Tom Thumb, so he's in everybody's pocket. And they give him Simple Simon as his buddy cop detective partner, and his life is screwed. And someone drops a house on the Wicked Witch of the East, and there's a war between the queens and the witches who are like the mob, and he's stuck in the middle of it. And so this world was so vibrant, we could clash and we could do the stuff. Actually, I might even share a screen for you in a second and sort of show you.
Please do. I think we would all love to see it.
I'll sort of bring it up and you can see it, right? And what's so interesting about it is it's so much fun, right? It's like there's not a single part of it that isn't like enjoyable, you know? Like don't you just want to like enjoy yourself sometimes instead of messing around, instead of wondering, well, what's the continuity here and how does this tie into this? It's like, who cares? Calm down, shut up, right? Like, look at the thing, right? It doesn't matter, you know, like enjoy yourself, right?
That's why we do what we do is to get people away from everything. And it is so hard, I think, too, and especially with what we're going through right now, to get people away from the goddamn screen. I mean, it's just everybody's glued to what's happening in the news and what's going on next. And it's like we don't have control over that. We only have control over ourselves. And you got to pull yourself away, you know, and you got to be able to enjoy other things and, you know, to let loose a little bit. It allows you to think and to deal with what's going on. It's kind of like what you said about Wolverine and how he healed from his mutant powers, healing from PTSD. I think we all, after this, probably have some form of trauma from it, and you got to heal from it. And how do we heal from it? We got to get back outside. We got to interact more with our families and our kids who, you know, and our fans and everything. This is all extremely important. Let's take a look here.
Let me show you a little bit of this, right?
Oh, beautiful.
So this is Fiction Squad. And what it is, you can see this little map here. So, you know, here's where the children's stories live. And there's like horror, science fiction, fantasy, romance, crime. And so they all live in this world, and all of the undiscovered country is basically the stories that have yet to been told, right? And so in this, here's a Humpty Dumpty getting pushed off a wall, right? And now the cops are investigating, and it's this guy, Frankie Mac, and his partner is Simple Simon, who's just dumber than a rock, right? And it's such a cute little story, and it was so much fun to be able to do this. And so, you know, we basically just, you know, we had a blast, right? I mean, it's mashing genres together. And you know, that's what people want, right? They want to have this. It's like, look at the Cards beating him up. The Cards are beating up Pinocchio, and when they interview Pinocchio, they put a measuring tape by his nose, and it's a lie detector test. And so if he lies,
it goes up longer. Yeah.
so we could take one genre and we could mash it with the next, right? And so to some extent, this is what we did with Fairy Quest, which I'll show you Fairy Quest as well for the sake of people that have never seen it before.
Please do.
Fairy Quest is a beautiful story that sort of has its roots in basic, like like stories from kids are always got a little bit macabre. Like Hansel and Gretel is about cannibalism. I'm sorry, but it's about some old lady eating a couple of kids, right?
Yeah, who wants to eat a couple of kids? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, but the original Pied Piper of Hamelin story was actually about a serial killer they believe lived in Germany in Hamelin, who would lure kids in, and they couldn't deal with it as a society. And so one of the things that they felt that they kind of needed to do was to help explain it. And here's a cautionary tale, and here's a cautionary tale. So let's kind of explore it a little bit, but that's no fun. I mean, nobody really likes, talking about like serial killers, right? So, there's darkness in it. And let me show you a little bit of Fairy Quest. This is it. And I'll just kind of make this window.
I love these finished pages. I like the what is it? The sepia, or it has like that old comic book feel to it.
Yep.
Yeah. The edges.
And so, just beautiful coloring by Leonardo Olea. His coloring is brilliant, but look at this, man.
This is beautiful, Paul. It is absolutely gorgeous. I want to pick up both these books because I'm always looking for something something that I can enjoy reading and that my son can enjoy reading too. And as you know, throughout this whole episode, I've been just so excited to have you here today because I'm such a fan of everything of so many things that you've done, so many things that you've touched. And I think that it's really amazing that you've managed to kind of start at the big leagues and then set off on your own and find extraordinary success. I mean, just this stuff looks really great. And where can I buy Fairy Quest? Like where do I go to my comic shop? Where are you going to make the most money from it?
Right now it's out of print. So,
it's out of print right now. Oh,
yeah.
Out of luck there.
And so at the beginning of July, we're coming out with Fairy Quest 3 that people have asked us for years. So we're doing Fairy Quest 3, and we're going to reissue 1 and 2 as part of that race. So we're about to do a big Fairy Quest campaign. And we'll ask our friends, hey, help us promote it. Help us make this thing back. You're right. You want to be able to read this with your son. And one thing I'll say about Fairy Quest, when I'm at a show, I can have a little 5-year-old girl or a 65-year-old man come up to me and they will always buy a copy. Like our sell rate at shows is about like 90%. About 90% of people that come up and see it say, oh my God, I want one of these. So, what you want to do is to be able to go and read it. And like you said, read it with your son, enjoy it and love it yourself. So we have those same people will come back to us and, a day later and say, I just read that last night and I want the next one, please. And so if you've got this demographic of everyone, it's all ages, it's everybody. And it's truly all ages. And so we're going to be doing a lot more Fablewood stories. We're going to be doing Fairy Quest. We're going to be doing maybe another Fiction Squad. I've got a new one that I want to do about a woman who's a cover model on the front of romance covers. That's her job, and she lives in the world of romance. And they send her to the world of horror stories as an ambassador, and she hates
so now she becomes a victim.
She hates it. It's about accepting cultural differences, and she hates it so much. And then she realizes people are people. It's just their job, and people are people wherever you go. It's just that it takes us a while to get into it. And so there's a great, interesting set of real life ideals that come into these stories, just done in the form of all ages stories. And so we're kind of excited to be able to do that. But I think what it speaks to a little bit is that so much of my work throughout my career, and so much of the way that I have been, has very clearly dealt with matters of inclusion, representation. So I think let's talk for a minute about how relevant that is because of what's happening in the world right now.
Please.
I am not a political person. I'm about to piss everybody off, right? Here's my feeling on politics. Politics is a self-enrichment scam perpetrated by a bunch of very, very wealthy people in power who make you think that you're allied to something as they get richer. Pick one. Like when Pete Buttigieg was on stage with Elizabeth Warren, and Elizabeth Warren said, well, we shouldn't put this in the purview of millionaires and billionaires. And he sort of looked at her and went, I'm the only person on the stage that's not a millionaire. Are you kidding me? Stop it. Okay. So I'm that guy. And again, it's something I probably share a little bit with Alan. I hate it. I loathe politics.
I do too.
But I think that we're in a place where the part of the problem is that any social issue is getting hijacked by politics, right? So for example, let's take issues of racial discrimination. That's not a political issue. And anyone that makes it a political issue is a jackass, okay? It's a social and personal human issue. We should be able to look at people and work out, how do we feel about people being marginalized and disaffected and frustrated? How should we feel about inequity in wealth? How should we feel about the fact that as the COVID epidemic has gone on, a couple of billionaires have got $455 billion richer, right? How do you feel about those things? Now, I don't need to be a warrior for all of this. It's just, these are things that we can talk about, just like we can talk about climate change. You may or may not feel a certain way about climate change, but you better not feel that way because you're either a Democrat or Republican, right? If you think that climate change is caused by us, not because of science, but because you're a Democrat, then you're a jackass. And if you think that we didn't cause it because you're a Republican, you're a jackass. Come on, calm down. You need to get over your cognitive dissonance and your biases, and you need to start looking at the world. So that takes us to where we're at right now, which is we are in a particularly difficult moment in history. We've broken it. We've broken it, right? We're seeing it broken.
I don't take responsibility. I didn't break shit. They did it. The politicians did it. I'm just.
Well, yeah, sure. But it's of the people, for the people, by the people.
Right.
Therefore, we have a collective responsibility. And I'd like to tell you a little bit on a personal level about why I've written the way that I have written and what I've made and what it still means. Okay, because I think this is more relevant, and it's not. So I was talking with somebody online today, quite a political person, and the question came up, when you say something that's kind, like an act of kindness, talking about inclusion, talking about not wanting to hurt anybody, if that's hijacked into a political conversation, if someone says you're a social justice warrior, if someone says to me, that's virtue signaling or whatever the latest, I'm like, well, wait a minute. It almost seems like you've got an argument for anything. If I say something kind, you say that's virtual signaling, and I go, man, it's just me just wanting people to get stop it, right? You got a thing for anything, and you're never going to listen. But recently, I gave a TED talk. Actually, I gave a talk about the future of storytelling, and one of the things that I talked about was people's predispositions and cognitive biases. So let's go down this road for a second and see if we can see why it got us to what the problem is. We are faced with an issue, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an excerpt from my TED talk. You ready?
Go ahead. I'm going to give you the center stage here. Take it away, my friend.
So, when everyone has seen the famous thing of the Loch Ness monster, the famous picture where the Loch Ness monster is sitting in the middle of a pool and his head's poking out like that, and there's a very famous story about the guy who actually did it. He faked it. He faked it because he was very angry at the Daily Mail in Great Britain. They had upset him because he had tried to fake the monster's footprints by the side of the loch a few weeks before. He got a giant rhinoceros foot and he made implants into the clay, and they uncovered him and they called him a fraud, and he was very angry. So he thought, well, I'm going to really make fun of him this time. I'm going to make a little submarine. So he went to his son, and they got his son's best mate, and they all went and they made this submarine. Because how are you going to, what could be more reliable than relying on your stupid son, stupid best friend, right? They literally got this kid and they made a model. They float it out. They take a picture. He said to the Daily Mail, I got a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. The Daily Mail bit. They came down. They saw the picture and they said, oh, my God, you've got a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. And they printed it on the front of their newspaper. The very next day, that guy said, hey, guess what? It was me. And I got the pictures to prove it. And here's my son. And here's my son's idiot friend. And we're all here to tell you, we faked it. And everybody said, you're a liar. You didn't fake it. You couldn't have done that, because they were so predisposed to wanting the Loch Ness Monster. And they were so sure that this was a picture of the Loch Ness Monster that when he said this was not a picture of the Loch Ness Monster, everybody said, liar, fake news. It's crazy. Like, fake news started then. And so politicians have weaponized this. They take our cognitive dissonance and they take the rebound effect and they basically say, it works like this. If you believe in something very strongly, it could be usually a political belief. If you believe, for example, that, say, President Obama was born in Kenya, and you kind of think that that may be true, then when the proof comes that it wasn't true, here's his birth certificate, it's pretty obvious. It seemed a bit goofy in the first place, so why did you think that? It has a very unfortunate effect. The amygdala in the brain, that part of the brain that protects you, says, no, 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 you can't come in here, like, stupid idea. That's not, I've already built my house. My house is protected and you're about to come in and break my house down. I'm going to put fortifications around your house. In other words, when you disprove a clearly disprovable, verifiable falsehood, it has the unfortunate thing of turning people's opinions even more in favor of the falsehood. It reinforces incorrect beliefs. So that's what's happened in our society. And that is what has led us here. You've got complete demonstrable falsities that have now been proven, and people are struggling. Now, let's be clear. That's not a political issue. I mean, it may be revolve around politics, but that's not politics on my part. That's just literally science and problem solving. Same as climate science. Climate science doesn't care about your opinion. COVID-19 doesn't really care about whether you're a Republican or Democrat, right? It's going to be as bad as it is, and the science will remain the same, no matter what your belief is. So if you believe, we'll go on one tangent. If you believe that it's really, really dangerous, and it turns out not to be that dangerous, you're going to have a struggle when you find out. You're going to go, no, 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 it's still dangerous. It's going to be hard for you to accept it. So now you take it to what's happening in our society right now. We are at a moment in history where 400 years in this country of America of systematic racism has taken a group of people who are marginalized and got them to a point of frustration and sadness that they cannot overcome. And it is finally time for us to join together and to overcome this. But we are not overcoming systemic racism. We're overcoming our brains. We're overcoming the things that we have not chosen to accept. And the reason I say that is, as a human being, I have always been very vocal about marginalization and bullying. And there's a reason for it. It's because I grew up with nothing. It's because I have been treated badly for being poor. And no one can see that, right? No one sees that in the house I live in with my nice keyboard and my guitar over the back, you know, and I'm well-known writer and all that. But that's only anybody's understanding of me as a human being here in America. Before I got here, I didn't have shit, right? I grew up with nothing and I couldn't get anything. So coming from two worlds, I've written about it in my life constantly, coming from different worlds. I've written about marginalized and disaffected populations. You know, Alters was about a transgender lead character. And when people came at me and went, oh, well, you're certainly going on the bandwagon of transgender. I'm like, listen, man, I had a transgender character in the agency in 2000. Okay, so I get it, you know, but you want to fight it. Like, why can't we just accept that these are the things that are happening? We need to look at why they're happening, and we need to look at ourselves. So from this, then, I have been a very vocal person about defending people who are being bullied and about racism. I live in Georgia, and I live in a part of Georgia where some of the prevailing attitudes are a little bit difficult to deal with. And I've been a human being that all my life, if someone is racist around me, I say with 100%, no way. No, we're not doing that. And I got plenty of mates who are very nice people who have an element of racism in the way that they behave. And when they do it, I say, no, thank you. Let's not do that. And let's move away from it. Now, let's be clear about something. It's not about me. This is not about me. That just has been the way that I am. But there's a message in all of this, which is that is not nearly enough. Just because I have been like that very consistently, that's not nearly enough for what I should have done. And I feel like an asshole right now because, yeah, you know, I've had my approach to it and I've had my little quiet revolutions. But what I haven't done is read the right literature, and I haven't written letters to my congressman to make sure that we take care of this issue, which I care about. I haven't done nearly enough, and none of us have done nearly enough. Okay. And while we've been busy doing not nearly enough, there's been an entire group of this entire country that have been treated like shit. And we need to stop that now. That is now, we have now arrived at that point in history where it's kind of time to stop it. So why don't we stop it? And that's my little soapbox, right? Which is, I have been a guy who has been, I hope, a true staunch ally, but man, have I not been good enough. I haven't accepted my privilege the way that we should. My privilege is just that I can drive around the street, and the great way of putting it is, if I get pulled over, my thought process is, I'm pretty sure I can get out of this because I have a British accent. I can get out this speeding ticket. The point of view of a black person is likely to be, I hope I do not get shot. Okay, so this is ridiculous, and it's time for all of us to bring an end to it. As a result, my company, Meta Studios, we already had a couple of initiatives that we had in the works, but I wrote a statement today that I'd like to read to you, a couple of statements that I think make sense.
Please
right?
do. Please do.
My company's statement is this: Meta Studios was founded on a particular set of core values. It's true. It's actually written into our mission statement. The core values of transparency, integrity, and accountability. It was written into our mission statement, and it's shown to every new employee and every potential investor in our company. In later years, we added proactive communication to these core values because we could see its value and we had learned something about our business and each other. Today, we're going to add diverse representation to that list of core values in our mission statement because we see its value. This is our promise to the Black community, given as a show of support and understanding, and as a needed reminder that we have not yet done enough. We will listen with humility and will continue to learn from you. Simply avoiding discrimination based upon race, religion, gender identity, age, or sexual orientation is not enough. We commit to actively seeking employees from all of these communities as we grow. And this applies particularly to the Black community today as we reaffirm our support. We'll bring business to you, we'll support your business endeavors, and we'll always be ready to stand by you as the rest of the world resets and builds towards a future of true acceptance and equality. Humanity will eventually overcome the scourge of racism with love, hope, and understanding. But before we get that far, we will scare it into submission with action. That's our statement as a company, because that's what we truly believe, okay? So when we face these difficult issues, it is incumbent upon us to say, who are we? How do we feel? What is it that we have to say about our lives? What is it that we have to say from our perspective? Yeah. And this is what I feel I can say. And I said it recently on my Facebook page. When Me Too happened, I was appalled and I was frustrated. And I realized that I could talk to my wife, my friends, my mum, my wife's mother, anybody. And I could speak to any woman and they would have undergone some form of just bullshit in their lives because of being a woman. And I was struggling. How can I even say anything, right? What am I supposed to say? It's not bleeding heart to want to make that different. I don't want it to be that way anymore. I've never wanted it to be that way. And so what I did was say the only thing I could say, which is, I promise that I will teach my two boys to see their relationships with women through the lens by which they view my relationship with their mother, because my relationship with my wife is strong and they see it. And so they are going to see their relationships with women that way. By the same token, I can make a promise to my friends of color now, right? And we should all make this promise that I'm going to teach my kids to understand that issue And they're not going to be unable to see color. They're going to be able to see color very well. Thank you very much. And go, God, I love that color. That's my favorite. You know what I mean? They're going to do it that way instead. Because my kids, if they are two of the people that are making change in the world, then we've got two more people making change. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do that. So I know it sounds like a soapbox and I know it's a diatribe, right? But it wasn't a political one, man.
Hey, you know what? I am so touched and so honored that you felt that you could come on my show and open up so much. And as you've been saying this, I've been thinking about something, that this is the time for us to rebuild our nation.
Yep.
And we need every single brick in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what color that brick is. We need to rebuild. And we need to break those kinds of trained thinking that you mentioned about the Loch Ness Monster, that we can only accept one reality.
Well, here's a question, right? If I said to you, Onrie, man, unfortunately, I need to help you, man. You're crazy. We need to get you to a doctor. Your immediate reaction is going to be, don't you tell me I'm crazy, man. You're crazy, right? No one wants to be told that they're crazy or they're broken, but we're crazy and we're broken. And we better start realizing that. So I feel like, look, why don't we accept this and then we get to it? What am I going to do? Okay, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a lot of what I've already done. I'm going to continue to be this person that will always stand against any racist comment that comes near me ever. If anyone ever says it, I will do the same thing I've ever done, right? But you remember what I said? This isn't about me, man. It's not like whether or not I'm a hero or something. Fuck that noise. That's nothing. I haven't done nearly enough. It's time for us to maybe make a change. So as an example, Meta Studios in January did a little kind of living comic fairy quest. Actually, we did it at Pinewood Studios, and we did it with a company, a group of people downtown, Mario's Art Academy. Now, Mario is great, and they're in East Point, man, and East Point is not exactly, that's the hood, man. And I love Mario, and I love what he does, and he basically gets a lot of like kids in that part of the city, and he teaches them how to be artists, and he's such a great person. Mostly black kids, couple of white kids down there, but they don't have much money and they don't have any ability, but he does it anyway, and he teaches them love, and I sometimes work with them, and that's fine. I called Mario yesterday and I said, as part of our affirmation, I'm going to run a series of comic teaching things, and I'm going to recruit a bunch of my artist friends, and we are going to support your business. We're going to do a bunch of storytelling seminars where I'm going to go live with my artist friend, and I'm going to go through a story that we create as a comic book, and my artist is going to thumbnail sketch it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll do it with a bunch of artists, and we will get everybody to buy into that stream. And when they buy into that stream and buy into that stream, that money will go to your business, because they're struggling with COVID right now. It's the least I can do to start helping a group of people that need a chance, because every single one of those kids wants to be a comic book artist like anyone else. But as you see in like professional sports, how is a young black kid going to get the chance to be a quarterback when you've got a society somewhere else in, say, Texas, that's so affluent and rich that they can afford to put the kid, you know, the affluent white kid all the way through college and get him sorted out and give him all the opportunities to succeed? We all need an opportunity to succeed. And so I think Meta Studios and myself are going to like make a bit of a harder push to make something happen from it, you know?
You know, I think that's really fantastic. And I have no doubt that, like with everything else, you will be successful at this. And not only that, I want to say that everything that you have said, I know to be true. It is not fake news, because I've known you and of you for a long time, and just our personal interactions. The fact that you made time out of your schedule to come and be here with me today proves that everything that you have just said and what you feel is absolutely true. And I want to thank you for coming on the show today, because it truly means a lot, especially right now. You've given me hope, Paul, and I think you've given everybody who's listening to the show the same type of hope that a better future awaits us. And I think we need to hear that right now. So thank you so much, my friend. It really means a lot.
That better future does await for us, Onrie, and thank you for letting me be part of it. That we are the future. Like we're the people that make our own future, right? And so we're going to all get this, and we're going to band together, and we're going to make this happen. And we are going to stand against racism in all its forms, and we're going to stand not just against racism, but we're going to stand for people so that there's a form of equality, that wealth inequity, for example. You cannot have a bunch of billionaires make 454 billion out of the COVID disaster while everyone's losing their job and people are trying to work out how to survive, right? How could those people have made that money? Let's give that a rest. Yeah, let's change it. And let's not talk about it until we're tired and go, okay, well, I give up on it now. You know, we did a little bit, let's move on. No, it's time for it to completely change. Okay, so we're not burning the house down. We don't have to smash it all up, but we need to take a look at it together and work out what are we doing to change it.
How can we avoid the kinds of things that have happened over the course of the last week? How can we keep that from happening again? How can we build a stronger nation? I am all for that, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. And do me a favor, hang out backstage for a minute. I just wanted to talk to you for a second. Let me just wrap up everything here. Hang tight. What a great episode. I had so much, I learned so much just now from listening to Paul, and I've got goosebumps. I don't know about you guys, but I got goosebumps. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week with brand new guests. And I hope you all have a very safe and healthy weekend. Have a great time. And thank you so much for tuning in today. I'll see you guys next week. And until that time comes, onward to victory.